Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be taking a look at something a little bit out of the ordinary with the Spawn Bible. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in August of 1996, you can see here that the front cover of the book is designed to resemble that of a leather-bound Bible with gold embossing. It's a unique idea, though it's not anything super spectacular to look at, though I do appreciate them with sticking with a specific theme for the exterior of this book. Pencils, Greg Capullo. Inks, Danny Meeke, Kevin Conrad. Design, Philip Timper. Writers, Todd McFarlane, Bo Smith, Tom Orzechowski, Andrew Grossberg. Color, Todd Broker, Roy Young. The story begins with a full page of text, and that's because this isn't a traditional Spawn story. This is actually a book that provides a deep explanation of all of the major players within the pages of Spawn thus far, as well as new information regarding some of these characters' backgrounds and the story as a whole that we're going to get into when we look further into this book. So that first page of text that we just saw was mostly just getting us all caught up on the story thus far, and each subsequent page is supposed to be depicting a specific character and giving us more information about them. That being said, this first page doesn't really tell us anything new about Spawn. It's basically giving us the same information we already knew from reading the ongoing story, though we do learn some very important information about Hell and the Mabolja. Number one, we learn that Armageddon, the final battle between heaven and hell, is hell's only chance to defeat heaven. They get one shot, period. And if they fail, that's it. Heaven wins. So that is why Mabolja is so intent on building such a massive army of hellspawns for this final battle. He knows he only gets one opportunity to win this war. We also learn that this final battle will be triggered by heaven when the forces of heaven descend to the earth, and then the forces of hell rise up to meet them. But this is a little bit weird, because we also learn that Mabolja believes that he basically has endless time to keep recruiting hellspawns and search out the perfect humans to serve as the generals of his hellspawn army, and all the time in the world that he needs to torment them and torture them and basically rid them of their compassion, which is his number one priority. He wants to rid any of his generals of any and all compassion and heart to make them perfect killing machines, essentially. But this is weird, because if heaven is the side of the war that's going to trigger the final battle, and Mabolja has no idea when that's going to happen, it seems to me as though he would be a little bit more worried about making sure that he had all of the forces ready to go at a moment's notice, so that he'd be in the position that he needs to be to meet the forces of heaven and win this battle. Also, it's a little bit weird because we don't know if all of the different circles of hell are going to be working together. So there's that, as you know, on top of everything else. Yes, Mabolja is building a massive army, but what about the other circles of hell? What are they doing to prepare for this final battle? Do they even care? Is Mabolja the only one who's really worried about winning this war? This is stuff that's not elaborated on, and it is questions that I find to be rather interesting. We then get a little bit more background information about Al Simmons. This is actually interesting. We learn that Al Simmons, from a young child all the way into adulthood, was completely obsessed with winning. It was his end goal in everything, that he wouldn't even start debates with people unless he was absolutely certain that he could make his point and get it accepted by the people he was talking to. And this is kind of the drive that led him to being recruited by the CIA, and that drive to win was exactly what was exploited by Jason Wynn when he started giving Al these missions of assassinations and different types of black ops that were not always on the books. And he was telling this to Al in the sense of like, oh, this is all about national security and protecting American interest and America's borders, and really playing off the idea that every time Al successfully completed a mission, he was winning for America. And only later on did Al finally start to figure out that he was being played the whole time and that Jason Wynn was basically just using Al to serve his own ends. Unfortunately, by the time he figured this out and started confronting Wynn about it, Wynn decided that Al was no longer necessary and had him taken out by not one, but two assassins. And this is interesting as well. We, of course, know that Chapel was always talked about as being the person that killed Al Simmons, leading to him becoming Spawn, but we get our very first mention of another participant in that assassination by the name of Priest, which is a name that will be very important further on down the line in the Spawn story. Also, artwork throughout this book is phenomenal. Everybody involved in and it's simple. It's just characters on a plain background, but they're all so well done. Everyone just does such a bang-up job. I just want to once again completely commend everyone involved in doing all of these character depictions, from Greg to the ink team to the color team. They're just crushing it throughout this whole book. Our next two pages are dedicated to the Clown and the Violator, which is kind of strange considering that the two of them are the same character. In terms of the Clown's page, we actually don't learn any new information. It's more or less just a synopsis that brings us up to our current point in the story with all of the exploits that he's done so far in this comic book. So there's nothing super interesting there. However, we do get one interesting tidbit when it comes to the Violator on his page. That being, he claimed in the Violator miniseries, if you saw my episodes on that, if you haven't, feel free to check them out in my Spawn miniseries playlist, that he was born during the 16th century. Now, this wouldn't be a problem except for the fact that during the main series, he told a group of boys in New York City that he killed the medieval Spawn in the 12th century, which was supposedly 400 years before he was born. So it's basically explained here that the Violator's backstory is completely mysterious and that he lies so much that his lies often kind of cross over each other, so you never really know what to believe with him. We also learn that despite the fact that Violator is very much committed to the idea that the demons should be the ones who are leading Hell's armies and that humans really have no place in it, and that the Hellspawn honors should be given to them instead, he's never actually proven to Mabalja that he's deserving of the honor. His only mission given to him by Mabalja is that he is supposed to be preparing the Hellspawns that are sent back to Earth for their roles as generals in Hell's army, and basically getting them to the point where they no longer have compassion or any type of heart to speak up or emotions other than rage and anger and the desire to kill. He, however, has failed in every single one of those instances. Never one time has he ever actually gotten a Hellspawn to that point, which would probably go to great lengths in explaining exactly why Mabalja refuses to make him a Hellspawn and put him in charge of the armies. Our next two pages are about Wanda Blake and Terry Fitzgerald. I know it says Wanda and Cyan, but really there's nothing on this page about Cyan. Not that there really could be. She's like 2.5 or 3 years old. How much are you going to write about a toddler? We do, however, get information about Wanda's backstory, notably that she was born in South Carolina and that her family moved to Staten Island when she was a child as her father was pursuing some business opportunities. Unfortunately, those opportunities fell through and her family decided that they were going to move back to South Carolina. However, her grandmother decided she did not want to go back to South Carolina as her husband had apparently just died before they initially left to move to Staten Island, and she just felt there were too many depressing memories for her back home. This, however, was lining up with the exact same time that Granny Blake was losing her sight to glaucoma, and her family was worried about leaving her there. This led to the then teenage Wanda volunteering to stay with her grandmother and help care for her. Her family agreed, moved back to South Carolina, and left Wanda with Granny Blake to live in Staten Island together. Wanda then went on to graduate high school and get into law school, where she got an internship working for a congressman that ultimately led to her meeting Al Simmons. This, of course, led to the two of them becoming married, and we then learned that there was a lot of things going on in their marriage that Wanda felt very uneasy about. At the time that Al was promoted under Jason Wynn, and Jason was using him for all of these assassinations and black ops, Al's demeanor became very different, and Wanda was quite concerned, especially due to the fact that Al couldn't really talk about anything with her as it was all highly classified information. We do learn, though, at one point, Al slipped up and mentioned something about Botswana. Wanda tried to ask more about it, but he immediately shut her down, stating that he had already said too much and it was something he couldn't talk about. Ultimately, this was the mission on which he would lose his life, as he would then return a week later in a coffin. A few days after that, Wanda would see a news report stating that there had been an assassination in Botswana, which had led to the country falling into a civil war. However, she didn't really have time to dwell on any of this, as she was grieving over the loss of her husband, which then led to her and Terry Fitzgerald becoming an item and ultimately getting married and starting a new family with their daughter Cyan. We also learned some interesting facts about Terry. One, he was always a straight A student, super high level in his class, and that he and Al Simmons originally met when the two of them were attending the same college, as he was tutoring Al in English so that Al could maintain his status on the baseball team. After college, Terry immediately signed up to join the CIA and reconnected with Al in San Francisco, where Al was recruited by Jason Wynn. The two of them were involved in a foreign language course that was necessary for whatever missions or objectives that they'd be interacting with people with. But this led to them rekindling their friendship and actually becoming even better friends going forward. This led to Terry always being at Al and Wanda's house for barbecues and spending a lot of time with the two of them. And this is exactly why Terry was so connected to Wanda and there for her after Al died. He very much did feel like it was his job to watch out for his late best friend's wife, and didn't really actually plan on trying to make any sort of a romantic move on her. This was just something that kind of happened organically that led to the two of them becoming husband and wife and having a daughter and moving on with their lives after the death of their husband/friend, Al Simmons. We then get to Jason Wynn and Angela. Jason's is actually pretty interesting. We learn that Jason is actually 57 years old, but that he started his work with the government in 1958, originally under Richard Nixon, and has been climbing his way up the ladder the whole time to the point where he is now, where he's basically running all of the lettered bureaus of the government and working with near impunity, basically doing whatever he pleases, constantly trying to vie for more power, more control, as he essentially wants to use the might of America's military and government machine to make himself the most powerful man in the country, if not the world, essentially. His ambition really knows no ends, and he's really willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that he never loses that power. This, of course, being exhibited in the sense that he very often starts civil wars in foreign countries, has people assassinated, kills people that work underneath him, and is currently working with a demon to make sure that his power remains unchecked. So, obviously, it goes without saying, Jason Wynn, not the greatest dude, if that wasn't clear already. Angela's page, we learned some new information about her that we weren't really aware of before. Number one, she is, this part I think was brought up in the Angela miniseries. I'd have to go back and check. If you want to go back and check, feel free to check out the Angela miniseries episodes in my Spawn miniseries playlist. Number one, she is 100,000 years old. But this is where we learn some interesting factoids about heaven. She lives in Elysium, which is the first level of the 7 heavens and is closest to God. This is the first time I recall it being stated that there are 7 heavens and that there are different levels upon which they all exist, and that Elysium is the top level and that's the one closest to God, and also is the level that kind of functions as a bureaucracy that essentially makes all of the decisions for the other levels is the way it's kind of depicted in this. They don't go into like a ton of detail, but it's very much insinuated that that's the hierarchy of the 7 heavens. We also learn that angels are part of the creator directly. They're not just necessarily independent beings, which makes it very strange that Angela and her friends were allowed to go off and become freelance angels at the end of the Angela miniseries. This is something that is not typical, and as it's not directly stated that it's never happened before, but it's highly implied that this is kind of the first time this has ever been done. And it's not really explained why this was allowed to happen, other than the fact that Angela is Angela and she kind of gets to do what she wants. Next up, we have Cagliostro and the Mabolja. The things we learn about Cagliostro are actually rather interesting. We only recently learned in the story that Cog is in fact himself a Hellspawn, but we find out that he is actually a rather ancient Hellspawn, and perhaps even the very first Hellspawn. It's rumored that he was also the most vile and horrific of all of the Hellspawns as well. The rumors are that he may have served amongst the kings of Babylon, the pharaohs of Egypt, taken part in the Last Supper with Jesus Christ, and possibly single-handedly started the French Revolution. However, all of these things are unconfirmed. We learned that at some point or another, Cagliostro was able to separate himself from his symbiote. We don't know if this was his own doing or if his symbiote eventually just became bored with him, as Cog decided that he wasn't going to pursue the ends and means that hell was trying to force him to pursue. He wanted to cast off the shackles of the Mabolja and find a way to lift the curse that had been set upon him. He then devoted his existence to hunting down new Hellspawns and trying to convince them to follow the path that he had taken. Unfortunately, this has never actually panned out for him. He has never once been able to fully convince a Hellspawn to abandon everything that they're supposed to be on Earth to do and cast off their shackles from the Mabolja and join him in a crusade to try and figure out a way to get out of the agreement they made with Mabolja, and also learn how to perhaps find redemption in some way or another. Of course, this is what he's currently doing with Al Simmons. Whether or not it's going to work out, we're just going to have to wait and see in the story. Next up, we have Mabolja. Mabolja's is rather interesting. We learned that Mabolja is actually 70,000 years old, which means he's 30,000 years younger than Angela. He was created by a Grand Maul demon by the name of Leviathan, who made him from the most horrific and unspeakable sins that he could think of to create this new pet project of his. Unfortunately for him, as soon as he completed creating the Mabolja, and Mabolja gained sentience, he immediately turned on Leviathan and slayed him. However, this didn't actually end Leviathan's existence, as we learned that some of his essence survived, and that Mabolja then locked away that surviving essence and took his throne as the Supreme Master of Hell. We also learn that while Mabolja was not the one responsible for creating the Hellspawns, he is the one who took the idea and ran with it. This is not actually just because of the impending war between Hell and Heaven. It's also because Mabolja wants his own army at hand at all times in case anyone ever comes for his throne. He is determined to make sure that what happened to Leviathan and so many of the other different archdemons who have ruled over different levels of hell does not happen to him. He wants to rule for eternity, and he wants to make sure that he has the forces necessary to ensure that. Next up, we get to Tony Twist and Overkill. Tony's is an interesting story. We learn a lot about him that we didn't know. Tony was born in Sicily and born to a family of rather modest means, two of his uncles being bishops in the Catholic Church, two of his older brothers pursuing careers as clergymen for the Catholic Church as well. Tony ultimately decided to turn to a life of crime in the pursuit of wealth and power. In his teenage years, he joined a very tough gang in Sicily, which caught the eye of one Don Bartino, Bartino being one of the most powerful dons in all of Sicily. He took Tony under his wing and sent him to New York City when he was 18, where he quickly rose through the ranks of the New York Mafia to where we see him today as the reigning don of all of the New York crime families. Unfortunately, due to some recent mistakes that Tony has incurred, due to his interactions with Spawn and him losing Overkill, his power is not just threatened, his life is threatened as well. The idea that he can no longer return Overkill to Don Bartino does not bode well for him, and if he can't figure something out soon, he's going to be swimming with the fishes, as it were. Overkill, on the other hand, is a different story. He was born a regular man by the name of, hold on, let me read it here. Nicholas Roca. That's what it is. Nicholas Roca. He was always a large kid and grew to an incredible stature, himself being a gang member who caught the eye of Don Bartino, who brought him into the mob as an enforcer. He lived up to this role perfectly and eventually just kept getting involved in physical altercations, his body growing bigger, him becoming stronger, and he at a certain point wound up killing the son of a rival mafia don. This, of course, led to a hit being put out on him by said rival don, and he was led into an ambush where he was gunned down RoboCop style, as it were, to the point where he was near death. However, he managed to survive, and when he was brought back to Don Bartino, Tony Twist suggested to the Don that they put Overkill into a program to make him into a super soldier, using advanced cybernetics to enhance his body to impossible levels of strength, making him the ultimate killing machine and enforcer weapon for the mob to use at their disposal. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. I was always under the impression that Overkill existed first, which led Tony to trying to create Tremor, as he wanted his own invincible super soldier that he had full control over without having to go through Don Bartino. This is not the case. We learn in the Spawn Bible that Tremor was actually the first experiment, and it didn't work out because they couldn't control him, and he ultimately escaped the Mafia to just kind of do whatever he wanted. This is where the success came in with Overkill. Overkill was already fully devoted to working for the Mafia, and he willingly took place in these experiments, as he was likely to die if he hadn't, to rebuild his body into this ultimate killing machine so that he could continue to work on behalf of the Mafia under the direct orders of Don Bartino. And Don Bartino used this to great effect, as he would basically just keep loaning Overkill out to other Dons to put them into his debt so that he could call in favors from them later on, whatever those favors may be. And it wasn't until he was lent out to Tony Twist and did battle with Spawn, where we saw him destroyed, that he ever came into a problem that he couldn't handle on his own. This was literally the first defeat that the cyborg version of Overkill had ever suffered, and whoa, what a defeat it was, as his body was basically destroyed to nothing but nuts and bolts and had to be fully rebuilt by Tony Twist in New York City, only to then lose track of Overkill as he kind of just started going off and doing his own thing, which is what ultimately led to Tony trying to recapture Tremor to make a new and improved version of Overkill that he could send back to Don Bartino, so that Don Bartino didn't decide to put Tony on ice, as it were. Next up, we come to Sam and Twitch, the two detectives who have been trying to uncover what's going on with Spawn since the beginning of the series. We learned that Sam's upbringing was not exactly the best. He spent basically his entire life as an outcast, never really fitting in. Originally, he was in public school, often not really fitting in with the crowds in school. His parents ultimately sent him to a private school where he didn't fit in either. He then joined the military and became a corporal. That also led to him not really fitting in, though he learned important skills while working in the military, and that was how to play people like a fiddle. He learned how to pit his enemies against one another, and these are skills he used when he ultimately became a police officer after he was discharged from the army. He put these skills to work as a beat cop and then eventually became detective, which leads us to where we find him now. We also learned that really up until the point where he and Twitch were put together on the same beat, he never really had any close friends, and that Twitch is actually the best friend he's ever had in his entire life. Now, Twitch, on the other hand, is a completely different story. We learn that his real name is actually Maximilian Stephen Percival Williams, and that Twitch comes from opulent wealth. His family were actually moguls in the house paint business, and that he was their sole heir. He grew up attending the best private schools, eventually went to Harvard, where he graduated with honors, but he had a falling out with his parents when he ultimately decided to join the police, as they felt this was far beneath him and that it was a blemish on their family name. This ultimately led to them writing him out of the will and disowning him altogether. We also learned that Twitch spent most of his life being a nerd, not really fitting in, not really being all that popular, being made fun of and teased throughout his entire life. And it wasn't until he finally just embraced the Twitch nickname that he was given as a child that he finally was able to overcome this persona that he had been given unfairly by his peers. He eventually ran for class president as Twitch Williams and essentially just kind of stopped caring what anyone said or thought about him and actually ended up winning the election. At prom that year, he started dancing crazily by himself on the dance floor, and while he wasn't very good, he just leaned into it, and when people started laughing, he just said to hell with it and grabbed the prettiest girl that he saw and brought her onto the floor to dance with him. This is the woman that he would ultimately end up marrying and starting a family with, and is the woman that he is still with to this very day. However, after losing his job on the police force due to the former the former chief of their precinct being in the employ of Jason Wynn and firing the two of them because they were getting too close to uncovering his dirty dealings that he was doing on the behalf of Jason, he is now in a position where he's not really able to provide for his family. So now he and Sam are just trying to wing it as private investigators. Unfortunately, Sam is blowing through all of the money that he had been saving up for decades, and Twitch doesn't see a whole lot of money coming in, which means that maybe this isn't the greatest business venture of all time, and it may not exactly pan out in a means for him to continue to provide for his family. Next up, we get to the medieval spawn and the Redeemer. We learn that the backstory of the medieval spawn is actually one of tragedy. He began his life on Earth as Sir John of York, as a knight in the court of King Henry II. He was a man of honor and of cunning, and was quite a decorated soldier. Unfortunately for him, he mistook one of King Henry's angry rants as a direct order, and decided to take it upon himself to ultimately kill a clergy member of the Catholic Church. This, of course, forced King Henry's hand to expel Sir John from his court and tell him never to return. At this point, Sir John, being a man of honor, wanting to clear his name, decided that he was going to do whatever it took to get back into the king's good graces so that he could rejoin the court and have his honor restored. He took on many mercenary jobs in the meantime and ultimately rejoined up with the king's army in disguise when they were called to defend the island of Ireland against the Normans. After the battle was won, he tried to approach the king to beg for him to bring him back into the fold, as he had performed admirably during this battle. Unfortunately, he was still wearing his disguise, which led to him being mistaken as an assassin. He was immediately killed by the king's guard, and what makes matters even worse is that all of the soldiers who killed him were men that he had directly trained. After he died, he was immediately brought to hell, where the Mabolja offered him the same deal that he offered to Al Simmons. However, Sir John wanted one thing: his honor restored, and for his name to be restored. Mabolja granted this and sent him back to Earth, where he reappeared outside of his family's ancestral home. The home was now long gone, but in its wake stood a monument that said, "Dedicated to Sir John of York, Hero of the Realm." And that was it. That was the restoration of his name that Mabolja promised him. He immediately realized that he had been taken for a ride by Mabolja, and basically decided that he was going to do everything in his power to serve honor and chivalry as a knight from this day forward. He had many adventures, took on many jobs to try and protect the innocent and do what he believed was the most honorable of deeds throughout the land. But unfortunately, before he could really get his footing and figure out what he was going to do with his future, he was brought to an end once again, this time when he was killed by Angela. And what makes things even worse is that he never truly understood exactly what was happening around him. He never really understood what it meant to be a hellspawn, why he was brought back to the earthly realm, why this deal was made with him, why he was deceived by Mabolja. None of these answers were ever actually given to him because he was killed by Angela before he could ever figure any of it out. And it really is just a tragic tale of a guy who was trying to do the right thing in all aspects of his life, but ultimately was recruited by a demon and made a deal with said demon that backfired upon him. It's really just sad all the way around. Next up, we get to the Redeemer. Now, what we learned about the Redeemer is a little bit interesting. All of the Redeemers come from a satellite that orbits the Earth called the Star Chamber. The Star Chamber is not necessarily a vessel of heaven, but they do work directly with heaven. And anytime the forces of heaven want a Redeemer, they call upon the Star Chamber to make them one. Now, the way it's told here, literally anyone can be made into a Redeemer. However, the process works better if the person chosen for the role is already a devoted follower of God, which explains why with Jason Wynn, being turned into a Redeemer didn't actually work all that well, despite Jason being a well-trained fighter and having a desire to rid himself of Spawn, who at the time he didn't even realize was Al Simmons. It ultimately just didn't work out at all because he himself had no faith whatsoever in God. So after learning that and realizing that they needed devout followers to be Redeemers, they decided to change up their plan and start picking really devoted followers on Earth to become Redeemers to go after the Hellspawns. Now, we do of course know that this Redeemer was then defeated by Spawn when he stormed the building of the angels, but he's not dead yet, so we're not exactly sure where he's at right now or what's being done to prepare him for his next encounter with Spawn. Next up, we get the Curse and Cy-Gor. Now, we don't actually learn a whole lot of new information about either one of these characters. It's really just one tidbit about each. As it pertains to Curse, we learn that the reason that he was dissecting Spawn in his castle wasn't because he believed that this was the will of God or anything. He had actually given up entirely on receiving the blessings of God at that point. He was doing it because he believed that he could actually study Spawn's body and learn the secrets of the necroplasm to gain all of the knowledge of hell and then use that knowledge to somehow control Satan to his will. I don't know if that's actually what could have possibly happened. As we know, having read all of the issues that involve Curse up until this point, Curse is rather crazy. So it's entirely likely that this is just some crackpot theory he came up with that he has no way of actually knowing will work. In terms of Cy-Gor, what we learn about him is that his brain actually comes from an old protege of Al Simmons by the name of Smitty Smith. He was a younger soldier that Al was training, giving all the ins and outs to about how to work behind enemy lines covertly, take out targets, and get away scot-free, essentially, giving him all of the down and dirty information that he didn't learn in his formal training. Smitty's brain was actually chosen because he was such a good soldier, just like Al Simmons, and the government wanted to pick their very best for this new ultimate super cyber soldier that they were trying to build. Smitty was actually not on board with this and was actually killed. Not really killed, his brain is still alive, but his body was destroyed as he was captured and put into this program against his will. He unfortunately believes that Al Simmons was somehow behind all of this, despite the fact that Al had nothing to do with any of this, which is why he has come to New York, because he is trying to track down Al Simmons to enact his revenge. This, of course, does insinuate that Smitty was unaware that Al had died and just thinks that he still lives in the New York area with Wanda and that the two of them are still married. Next up, we get Tiffany and Tremor. We don't learn a ton about Tiffany as she's only actually appeared in 2 issues thus far, so there isn't a whole lot to go on. What we do learn is that apparently she has the ability to shapeshift and can take on the form of whatever is necessary to complete her objective. And while she is an angel in the employ of heaven and is working on their direct orders, she is not just doing that. She also has her own secondary objectives that she's working toward. Of course, she, as an angel, is supposed to take out the enemies of heaven, including the Hellspawn, but she also wants to eliminate all which she perceives as evil, as she believes that's the only way to ultimately ensure heaven's victory. Unfortunately, this leads to her making rash decisions where she sees any smite against her as a personal attack on good, and often decides that if someone goes against her, that they have been betrayed, or that they have betrayed her and turned to evil. So she then goes after them with lethal intent, which is a bit of an overreaction, and also creates an interesting dynamic where she is an angel who is working towards heaven's ultimate goals, but is also working towards things that heaven does not have in mind, which makes us question how that's going to play out for her in the future. As it comes to Tremor, we learn that Tremor, aka Richard, and his brother David were brought into Twist's mafia at a young age, Richard being the muscle and David being the brains. They actually worked really well together and rose through the ranks of Twist's mafia. Unfortunately, Richard eventually got to a point where he no longer wanted to be part of the mafia. He had married and had some children, and he wanted a more quiet life and to open a grocery store with his wife that the two of them can operate together as a family business. When David learned of this, he went and told Tony Twist, thinking that Twist would then offer him more money to stay. Unfortunately for Richard, and also David, and all of Richard's family, this was not the case. Tony decided that he would then leverage the threat of violence against Richard's family to force him into a new experiment to turn him into a super soldier that could then work for Tony Twist in a new capacity. Richard ultimately agreed to try and protect his family. Unfortunately, the effects of the experiments didn't go as planned, and they ultimately decided that the experiment itself was a failure, despite Richard being turned into Tremor, who's this giant hulking beast monster guy. He wasn't fully controllable. So as a result of this, Twist decided that he was going to tie up any loose ends and kill Tremor and his family. Tremor was able to escape before he was killed. Unfortunately, the same could not be said of his family, as his wife and children were all taken out by Twist's men. After this happened, this leads us to where we are in the story with Tremor now, where Tremor is going after Twist and trying to get his brother out of Twist's mafia, and also convince his brother David that he is in fact Richard, as David believes that Richard is in fact the monster that killed his brother and his brother's family. This, of course, just being lies that Twist told him. But I really like the little bit of backstory we got here about Tremor, because I really like Tremor as a character, and I think his story leaves a lot of new plot points and different story opportunities because of how deep it gets, despite the fact that at this point, Tremor has only appeared in like 3 issues of Spawn. He really gets a lot of super cool like story arcs, and I really wish that he played a bigger role in the Spawn story than he has. And finally, we get to Granny Blake and Bobby and Bootsy. In terms of Granny, we actually don't learn anything about her that we didn't already know, so I'm just going to skip right past her page and get into Bobby and Bootsy. What we learn about Bobby is some things that we already knew, that his wife died of cancer, which is what led to him ultimately becoming an alcoholic and winding up on the streets. What we learn new about him is that he also had a daughter with said wife, and as he descended deeper into alcoholism, he basically abandoned her in the care of her grandparents and just left, just walked out and became a bum living on the streets of New York, which only makes his story even sadder, as he not only had to deal with the tragic loss of his wife, but he then let this loss destroy his life and ultimately put even more of an emotional burden on his daughter, who had lost her mother and then had to end up losing her father as well, because he had sunken so far into his own depression and addiction that he just walked out of her life and abandoned her. Now, in terms of Bootsy, we're learning more than we've ever known about him, as he hasn't really been that big of a focus in the story thus far. Bootsy came from a very bad childhood where his father abandoned him and his mother was a prostitute. He basically found movies as his means of escapism from the terribleness of his home life, and would spend every opportunity he could get in the movies watching old westerns. Those were his favorite type of film, and he would just watch them over and over again. As he became an adult, this started to interfere with his professional life, as he would find jobs but ultimately get fired from said jobs because he was constantly showing up late or leaving early to go watch movies, and eventually this led to him winding up on the streets, as he could never keep a steady job going and had no money to pay any of his bills with. However, despite all of this happening to him, he never actually lost his love of the silver screen and the Old West. And when he found the pair of cowboy boots in the dumpster outside of a theater house where they were performing Oklahoma, he took them and made them his prized possession, constantly taking perfect care of them, keeping them in the best condition he can possibly keep them in, cleaning them all the time, and making sure that they stay in the most pristine condition possible so that he can one day live out his cowboy fantasy. Though how he's going to do that on the streets of New York City, I'm not exactly sure. Next up, we get a 2-page interview with Greg Capullo that is conducted by Terry Fitzgerald. I'm not going to go over the entire interview as it is rather long, but there were a few questions I found interesting. One of which, Terry asked Greg what his favorite characters in the Spawn story are to draw. And surprisingly, Greg answered the normal people like Wanda and Terry and Granny Blake and Jason Wynn, because they're the most challenging to make interesting. They are just regular, everyday human beings, so he has to push himself to draw them in ways that are visually intriguing to look at, versus characters like Spawn and Violator, which are already like over-the-top, outrageous comic book characters, meaning that it's not that difficult to make them look interesting. I thought that was a really cool way of him looking at it, to take the most average, run-of-the-mill characters and try to make them interesting was what he found enjoyable about drawing. He also gets asked by Terry at one point if he does any kind of like sketch work beforehand and then uses that to be the basis for his drawings. And Greg answers that no, he doesn't do that at all. He just goes straight into it with no thumbnails, no, storyboards or anything like that ahead of time. He literally just puts pencil to paper and goes after it, which is such a balls to the wall way of drawing. Like, you have to have so much confidence in your ability to just go directly into it and skip over any kind of like pre-planning. So I got to commend him on that. I mean, it's definitely worked out for him. He still has a very prominent career in the industry to this day as I'm recording this video. So good on you, Greg. Next up, we get a 2-page interview with Greg Capullo that is conducted by Terry Fitzgerald. One of which, Terry asked Greg what his favorite characters in the Spawn story are to draw. And surprisingly, Greg answered the normal people like Wanda and Terry and Granny Blake and Jason Wynn, because they're the most challenging to make interesting. They are just regular, everyday human beings. So he has to push himself to draw them in ways that are visually intriguing to look at, versus characters like Spawn and Violator, which are already like over-the-top, outrageous comic book characters, meaning that it's not that difficult to make them look interesting. I thought that was a really cool way of him looking at it, to take the most We then get a 2-page ad for Curse of the Spawn, this of course being the same ad that we saw in last week's video, and as I stated in last week's video, I will be beginning my series on Curse of the Spawn next month, so stay tuned for that. We then reach the end cap, which in this issue is actually a 2-page ad for the brand new, at this time, McFarlane Toys Collectors Club. This actually still exists to this day, and it gets you access to being able to buy figures that are not offered in retail venues or on other online stores. They are exclusive to McFarlaneToys.com or whatever that website's called these days. And the very first exclusive figure that was ever offered from the Collectors Club was Cosmic Angela. Now, those of you who are a little bit more in the know or may remember the original Angela figure, this is essentially just a repaint. She's been repainted as having red armor, trying to replicate the costume that we saw her wearing at the very end of the Angela miniseries after she had decided to go freelance and start her own angel mercenary group, as it were. Which, okay, I get it, but like at the same time, you should have tried to resculpt it a little, as the armor wasn't absolutely identical to the armor that she had been wearing previously. And for you to just go with a repaint, I understand makes sense financially, but in terms of this being what you were using to try and draw people into your brand new collectors club for your toy line, I don't know. To me, that it just doesn't seem like this is like the wow, gotta have it figure that would really get people's attention. We then get an advertisement once again for the Spawn Chromium cards. I've talked about those in the past, so I won't talk about them here. And an ad for Curse of the Spawn number 2. I don't know why you would put multiple advertisements for Curse of the Spawn in the same book. I mean, this is 3 pages now devoted to advertising Curse of the Spawn in the exact same issue. It seems like a waste of pages to me, but apparently they were really trying to push Curse of the Spawn on everybody, so I guess to them it made sense, but I would have used this page for something different, considering you already gave a 2-page spread to advertising Curse of the Spawn. On the final page of the book, we get an advertisement for Spawn Fan Edition number 3 with the first appearance of Mercy. As I've stated in the past, I do not have any issues of Spawn Fan Edition. Though, if I ever come across them, you better believe I'm going to buy all of them because I really want to have a chance to make videos and read this story for the very first time. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Spawn the Movie from New Line Cinema. If you've never watched that movie before, feel free to do so. I don't think it's very good. Your opinions may differ, but it's definitely a movie that, in my opinion, leaves a lot to be desired. And I'm not just talking about the fact that it's clearly a comic book movie that's made in the 90s, so, its effects are not exactly what you would be accustomed to seeing today. That's not the problem. The problem I have is that just overall, the film just could have been better. There's so many differences between the film and the movie, and they tried to cram like way too much story into it, in my opinion. There was just a whole lot of issues that I have with that film. And despite the fact that I'm a huge fan of Spawn, I'm really not that big a fan of that movie. And that was the Spawn Bible. And ultimately, this book is kind of a mixed bag for me. It's not that I think it's bad. It's just that while I do really appreciate the new information and deeper backstory info that we're given about some of the characters, I'm kind of disappointed at the same time by the lack of new information that we're given about others. To me, when you're going to print something like this that's, quite a bit removed from your normal comic book storytelling, you really should use the opportunity to try and give as much new info about all of these longtime characters in the series as you can, especially info that wasn't really divulged in their appearances within the mainline series. That isn't entirely what is done here. As I stated, Granny Blake, nothing about her is new, and a lot of the things that we're told about many of the other characters is stuff that we already knew as well. The most interesting parts are the backstory lore that we learn about characters that we never knew, things that we learned about Cagliostro and Mabulja, for instance, the backstory that we're given about Bootsy that we didn't know anything about. These are the parts I find the most interesting, and I really feel like it's a missed opportunity to not make a point to do that with every single character that's featured in this issue. But then again, these are just my opinions. You may not have any problem with the way that this was done and think that, this was something they never had to put out in the first place, and it's just kind of cool that they did. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.